I'll talk up. All right. Well, thank y'all so much for being here. And if you're watching online, thank you. I know there's a lot of people that are sick. Pastor David and I had to talk about contingencies when so many people are sick. You don't have enough people to watch the children. That can be a difficult thing with kids running around and having fun doing what kids do, and you don't have the adults there. So there are a lot of people that are out. So I do thank you. And if you're home and you're feeling under the weather, we certainly lift you up in prayer. There's just so many people that are being affected by this. Children, some families have been out for 2 weeks. I know Samson was out and his family, and others have been out. Others have been in the hospital. We want to remember them. But tonight we are going to look at a lot of things. It's going to go a little faster tonight, but there's a lot that we'll read that is a lot of narrative that will have not as much explanation because it's sort of self-explanatory. But still, it's helping us understand what will come later as Jacob leads his family, and then they go into Egypt. So with that, let's open in prayer, and we'll get started. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to gather here, and for those that can't be here, they watch online, whether it be tonight or tomorrow or whenever. We know that there are many that are battling the flu, whether it be in the stomach or in the chest area, the upper respiratory. It's very difficult. So, Father, we pray for our church family and those that are hurting. Father, we pray for the children's ministry tonight that has been greatly impacted. I know the parenting class that would normally meet down the hall, the Molinas, this is 2 weeks going now that they're battling this. So, Father, we commit them to your care, but in the moments we have together, help us understand better what we see happening in Genesis 30 and 31. Helps us understand more of what you've revealed to us in your word. We thank you so much. We love you, and it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I do want to mention, so that we've got it here and it's out, those that aren't here, we are looking for the men's choir on the 30th of March. They are going to be familiar songs, is what Luann is telling me. I take that to mean older songs that many of us have heard for many years. I don't know, but we do need 15 men by the 9th of March to sign up. We do have to sign up. I have to have them registered because if we don't have the 15 by the 9th of March, we won't be able to do it. Because we've got to make the decision, because if we don't have those men, then we can't do it, because Luann has to work with her team, and so we need the men to commit if they can. 2 practices 2 weeks before, it'd be the 16th and the 23rd. Not difficult practices, and we'll do that, and then we will maybe do this once a quarter. So possibly we'll sing the same songs every time. They won't get old, and that way it'll be easy on us guys, especially us guys that don't sing much like me. Okay, so please, if you can, do that. So I was going to mention a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, during International Day, I was looking over at Matt Wingfield, and I go, Matt, how come you and I aren't up there singing? And he goes, and then Becky's, yeah, he is, he's doing that. But I was talking about, why aren't we up there singing during that? And he goes, So that was, but we get more men on the singing, and that will help men connect a little more. So let's go into a review from last week. We covered a lot last week. And you'll remember that Jacob finally went to get a wife to Haran from Rebekah's kin, that is his mother. And then at that time Esau marries Ishmael's daughter to appease mom and dad. There's a lot of dysfunctionality that's going on. Remember that Jacob encountered God and he sees access. It's always called Jacob's ladder. It's more like a set of stairs. And I drew a picture that it probably resembled one of the buildings. They called it a ziggurat, that is likely the Tower of Babel was in that shape. They were popular and easy to build so long ago. So Jacob arrives and he meets Rachel. And then Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel. And you'll recall there's a wedding ceremony, and in the middle of the night, Laban changes out Rachel for Leah. Now, in that culture, Jacob was not able to undo the wedding because he had consummated the wedding. You couldn't undo it. Once it's the wedding or the marriage is established there, he would celebrate the rest of the week, and then he was able to marry Rachel. And Jacob, of course, loved Rachel more than Leah. That's said many times. But God provides 3 sons, initially by Leah, and then we saw, 4 sons initially, and then we saw how the 3 of them were disqualified by future actions. And so we see other things happening. If you were to read the book of Judges, you're going to see more dysfunction out of the leaders of this family. Okay, so there's a lot to read. There's a lot of reading here, but we'll condense it down in the slides there. So if you would look in Genesis 30, we're going to look at the first 13 verses. Okay. So now remember, Leah has had sons, Rachel has not. And so Rachel then, in chapter 30, verse 1, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she envied her sister. "Give me sons or I will die." Exclamation point there. Very loud, very vocal, very emotional. She said to Jacob, and Jacob became angry with Rachel and said, "Am I in God's place who has withheld offspring from you?" Then she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go sleep with her and she'll bear children for me. So that through her I too can build a family." So Rachel gave her slave Bilhah to Jacob as a wife, and he slept with her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. Yes, he has heard me and given me a son." So she named him Dan. Rachel's slave Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Rachel said, "In my wrestlings with God, I have wrestled with my sister and won." Notice the enmity between 2 sisters there. And she named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her slave Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's slave Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune!" And she named him Gad. So they're bantering back and forth. When Leah's slave Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, Leah said, "I am happy that the women call me..." It says, "I am happy that the women call me happy." So she named him Asher. Now, when I was at a church in Waller, Texas, there was a man there that would come on occasion, and there were different ladies that would come, and it appeared that they were part of the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I think they were in a plural marriage of some kind. Obviously not legally, but as they would say, spiritually. They never all came at the same time, but he would come with different women, and they were dressed very conservatively. And so it was then that I started watching, because of that, I started watching that show, Sister Wives, because I wanted to understand a little bit about that, okay? And so I didn't understand that much about it, but I says, okay, I need to see this in real time and what they're going through. And it was a train wreck, the whole thing, okay? And so what we're seeing here is that we're seeing these 4 ladies, 2 wives that he has married, 2 concubines, but they're similar to a wife. And then the 2 legitimate wives are bantering with each other. Notice the toxicity there and the dysfunctionality. And you have Jacob trying to manage it all. It's chaotic. That's not the way God designed it. Okay? Not at all. And so that won't last. Okay, so Rachel's infertile, and she's frustrated, and she takes her emotions out on Jacob. Why is she mad at Jacob? Because her sister's having children and she's not. See the competition there? That should never enter a marriage. But it did. Now, just because God describes it this way doesn't mean that He prescribed it this way. He's just describing what took place. And so Jacob is angry, but he's rather cold, and he tells her, he says, it's true that God's withheld offspring from you. This is a God thing. This is not a me thing. Because I'm having children with these other ladies, so obviously there's not a problem with me. It's God that has kept you from having children. And it was true because it was God that did that. Okay? Now, remember when Rebekah wasn't having a child? What did Isaac do for her? He prayed for her. It doesn't indicate that Jacob prayed for the wife that he loved. It doesn't seem to say that. Now, I don't know if he did or not, but if he did, it's not recorded there. And so a little bit later, then Rachel followed Sarah's example and offers a surrogate. Now, if you have some of your translations, it will be either a New King James or a King James or some of the others. It would say something to the effect that they would bear children on my knees. Okay, and so when you see that phrase, that's literally what they're saying. What it meant is that the concubine would bear the child and then take the child and put it on the knees. Let's say that it's Rachel that's sitting down, to hold the baby, and perhaps there would be a wet nurse or whatever, but she would take the baby and put it on her knees as she's sitting down. That was a sign of adoption, is what that means. So if you see that they would birth the child on her knees, that meant that she was going to hand the child to one of Jacob's wives, and that there would be the adoption there, is what that's saying. And so that's very, we don't do that much today. We don't have surrogate mothers as much as we used to. I know that it happens from time to time, but in that culture it was very common because the handmaidens or the servants or the slaves, whatever you want to call them, were considered valuable. They were not treated bad as we aren't seeing here, but when they would have a child by the head of the household, that was considered the wife's child. Okay? Now remember, we see later on in Genesis, we see it later in the law, there's the marriage of the Levirate marriage. And so if the firstborn man died, the next in line unmarried brother was to marry the woman, the widow, and then when they had offspring, it was considered the offspring of the firstborn brother. And so what that was security within the clan. And so it's similar, but here it would be the wife's child. There would be that adoption there for that. Okay? Now, once the law was in place, you didn't need to do that because the law took care of those things, but we don't have the law here. And so Rachel follows Sarah's example, and where Sarah had offered her concubine to Abraham, now Rachel is offering Jacob a concubine, and then we have Dan and Naphtali. Now the names Dan and Naphtali and the descriptions there they show Rachel's struggle. Rachel is struggling there, and she feels that she's going to be validated in the eyes of her husband because her concubine had children. And so there's feelings of victory now that her concubine had children. Now, when I get to the end of this, I'm going to ask about how do you think these ladies felt? So we're building there. All right, so now Leah offers Zilpah in the same way because Leah's not having children. And so Zilpah is offered to Jacob, and then Gad and Asher are born. And so here these ladies are wanting to be viewed as worthy in their husband's eyes, but what are they doing? They're offering their handmaid, their slaves, their servants to their husband. They're saying, here, you're my servant. Here, go sleep with my husband so that you can have a child, and then you can give that child to me so that then I can be viewed favorably in my husband's eyes. It's very, very different than today. We just wouldn't do that today. Okay? If that's happening, I'm unaware of it. Okay? And so the wives are offering their maids, and there's competition among these wives. That was not God's original intent. He did not intend for the wife to have to be in competition with anybody or anything. Okay, because it's like this. When you marry, in the way we understand it, when you say yes to your spouse, you say no to everything and all others. You say yes to your spouse, you say no to all others. So if it's a man, you say no to all other women. If it's a woman, you say no to all other men. Okay? And so it's yes to my spouse, no to all others. And so here we have sisters and wives, sister wives. Where we get that from? That's that TV series that are in competition with one another. Now God's describing it; He's not prescribing it. But where did all this happen? It started when Rebecca and Jacob were deceiving Dad, and it's deceiving Esau, and it just spiraled out of control. Now they've gone to Laban, and he's also being deceptive. So what goes around comes around. Not karma, but it comes around. So let's look in verse 14 through 24, and it's going to get a little weirder here. And I've got some pictures on another slide I'm going to show you. Okay, so look in Genesis 30. We're going to look in verses 14 to 24. Okay, Reuben went out during the wheat harvest and found some mandrakes in the field. When he brought them to his mother Leah, Rachel asked, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But Leah replied to her, "Isn't it enough that you have taken my husband? Now you also want to take my son's mandrakes." "Well then," Rachel said, "he can sleep with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." Mandrakes are related to the potato. So think about this. Give me your son's potatoes, and you can sleep with my husband tonight. That's right. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. I got some pictures of mandrake and the mandrake roots here in just a minute, okay? This is for big boys and girls, okay? This really is. But you're right, Becky. It is crazy, okay? Now, when Jacob came in from the field that evening, Leah went out and met him and said, "You must come with me. I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So Jacob slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has rewarded me for giving me my slave, for giving my slave to my husband," and she named him Issachar. Okay, 19. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. "God has given me a good gift," Leah said. This time my husband will honor me." Notice each time, my husband will like me, my husband will honor me, my husband will be pleased with me. Now that was the culture then, because that was Social Security, having children. It was very, 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 very important in the social structure. So it seems like this is belittling of women. We got to be careful looking at what went on 3,000 years ago from the glasses we wear today. That was a different culture back then, and so we didn't live there. And so we do have to be careful of looking back and saying how messed up it is. Now, lying to one another, that's obviously wrong. But the way in that agro-business culture, we just want to be careful. "Okay, this time my husband will honor me because I've borne 6 sons for him," and she named him Zebulun. Later, Leah bore a daughter and named her Dinah. We believe this is the only daughter that they had. Okay, then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son, and she said, "God has taken away my disgrace." She named him Joseph and said, "May the Lord add another one to me," which that will ultimately be Benjamin. Okay, so Leah hires her husband. So they're mandrakes. Now they're related to the potato, so the bulbs are above the surface and the roots are below the ground. Now you see there where it says it resembled a human torso. I've got some pictures I'm going to show you in just a minute. Is generally, and all snowflakes are different, all roots look a little different. There was generally a couple of roots that would go out looking for water in an arid region, but sometimes you would see what looked like 2 arms going out. Not always, but it looked like a human torso, okay? And so it was believed to be an aphrodisiac. Okay, we're gonna read a couple more verses here in just a minute. And it believed to help with conception, okay? Now, in some cultures, to show you how superstitious this is, there are some cultures that they believed, I forget where it was, that alligator dung aided in conception. Okay, so these are all superstitions, but I want you to understand the culture of the day and what is going on. Okay, so, this, I'm not going to open it all the way, is a mandrake. You can peel these off and you can eat these. You don't eat this, but you eat the fruit. The fruit is okay to eat. The rest of the plant is poisonous. You don't eat it. Okay, so this is what different mandrakes would look like. Okay, so you see here on the left, you see the two legs coming down, and then the two maybe arms, or look like a pincher on a crab or a lobster. And so you see here, it looks different, and then in some cases here, you'll see the two legs, and they say that it's like hairy legs or whatever, because you just got it growing out. Okay, now, so that's what, you don't eat that. This and that and the leaves are poisonous, but the fruit is okay. Nothing wrong with the fruit. So, superstitious-wise, so they see this is below the ground. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go into all the details here, but this is what's going on in their culture. Okay? Now, notice, it appears that Jacob is not presently with Leah, because she says, is it enough that you've stolen my husband? So evidently he isn't living at Leah's tent, or he isn't being with Leah. Okay? So Reuben gets some mandrakes for Leah. Why is that happening? Why is the son going and getting mandrakes for his mama? Okay? So let's talk about mandrakes. So mandrakes, it was called a biblical love plant. Okay? So the root below the ground is, how should I say, quite sexual in that culture. They knew about the birds and the bees. Okay, there's no doubt about that. But they would use this as also, I'm going to talk about this later. Remember, we're going to read in just a minute where Rachel steals her dad's gods before they head back. So those gods typically would be carved and would be nude, and it's not a sexual image that they were looking at. A lot of this stuff was designed for fertility and security. Okay, they're not lusting after a naked god. That's not that at all. But it was based on fertility for security and longevity. Is really what this is. Okay, so, however, there was the aphrodisiac aspect of it, and the issue of they would think that it would provide for conception. Now, when you read the Song of Solomon, chapter 7, it's very explicit. So what you're seeing described there is the husband is describing his wife's body. He's describing her. When she describes him, and I'm condensing this down greatly, she is talking about what's going to happen, okay? So now this is the language between a husband and a wife. They're married, and he's talking about her lovely body, and then what she is doing is talking about getting away. It's in the springtime where the blossoms and they're beginning to open, and then there's the fruit, the pomegranates, and all these other things. And when you get to verse 13, what it's talking about, it is the fragrance of the mandrake. So what the Shulamite is saying to her husband, there's all this fruit there, and what she's saying is that, yeah, you're describing my body, but here's what I'm describing to you. I'm going to give you some mandrakes. The aroma of the mandrake is wonderful, and you're mine. This is what's going on in the Bible, okay? It's right there. You can read the whole 7th chapter. So this is the superstition, if you will, or the thought that what the mandrake is going to do. That's why this is so powerful here, is Leah is not having any children, and he's not, I don't know why he's not with her. It appears that he's not presently in the tent with Leah because Rachel has stolen him. So there's this competition. So Reuben goes out and gets some mandrakes for Mama. And then there's a discussion between sisters there. There's these tensions in the family. And then so Leah gets her husband back by giving the mandrakes to Rachel. Now think about this. Jacob's coming back in from the field, sweaty and dirty and been out working in the field. And she says, "Come here. You're mine. I purchased you from your other wife, my sister, with some potatoes." You see what's going on in that family? It's mandrakes. It's related to the mandrake. And so this is what's happening there in that family. It's not supposed to be that way. He was supposed to marry Leah because she's the firstborn, because the promise goes through Leah. Now, how God would have worked it out, we don't know. Now, God's ultimately going to work it out because He wanted the 12 tribes of Israel, okay, plus the 12 tribes plus Levi, okay, so the 12 regions and then Levi. So human ingenuity gets in there, and they're trying to work all this stuff up, but God's plans were going to prevail because God already said that He's going to work through Abraham, Isaac, then Jacob. Okay, so Leah gets her back, and then Leah has some children. Okay, so it appears that Rachel's plans with the plants don't work out for Rachel because Leah is now having children, but Rachel's not. Okay, what did she do with the mandrakes? I don't know. I don't know if she ate them or I have no idea. It doesn't say. But you can see the behind-the-scenes stuff of what's going on when you understand what mandrakes are all about. Okay. And then ultimately, God remembers Rachel and she has Joseph. Okay. And I would encourage y'all, I'm not going to do that here, but read Song of Solomon chapter 7. That helps understand. Then verse 13 is where it talks about the mandrakes. And so Rachel asks for another son after she has this one. And she ends up having another son, which is Benjamin in Genesis 35, 17 and 18. And in childbirth, she dies. Okay? So that is one reason why when Joseph is taken into captivity, the first son of Rachel, but Benjamin does not go to get the grain from Egypt because Jacob doesn't want to lose his second son. Because she dies in labor. Okay? I'm not implying that her death has anything to do with all the other chaos. It was just difficult back then. Okay? So that's what's going on. What do they say? All well in the household? Not at all. There's all this competition. I mean, can you imagine these two sisters that are married to the same man? You just imagine, and the Bible doesn't describe everything. There's probably a lot of arguing going on, a lot of animosity, a lot of work in the system, so that I can have more. I can give my husband more sons, so he'll like me more than the other. What does that say about him? He's letting this happen. It rises and falls on leadership, doesn't it? And he's not leading. He's not leading. Jacob is not leading the way he needs to. Yet God is still with him. Okay. So that's why it is best when you say yes to the one, you say no to all others. That makes the household so much better. Okay, so now that he's had his son Joseph, Jacob wants to go back home. So let's read all of 25 through 43. There's a lot of detail in there on chapter 30 that it helps us understand what's going on. So after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, he finally goes to his father-in-law, "Send me on my way so that I can return to my homeland." Okay, because he has provided the 14 years that he promised, okay? "Give me my wives and my children that I have worked for, and let me go. You know how hard I've worked for you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor with you, stay. I have learned by divination," there we go, by rolling the dice or doing something, "that the Lord has blessed me because of you." Then Laban said, "Name your wages and I will pay them." So Jacob said to him, "You know how I have served you and how your herds have fared with me, for you had very little before I came." Remember, there were 3 flocks, but now there's a lot more, I guess. But now your wealth has increased. The Lord has blessed you because of me. And now, when will I also do something for my own family?" Laban asked, "What should I give you?" Then Jacob said, "You don't need to give me anything. If you do this one thing for me, I will continue to shepherd and keep your flock. Let me go through all your sheep today and remove every sheep that is speckled or spotted, every dark-colored sheep among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the female goats." Those are the inferior ones, is what this is. "Such will be my wages." So he's wanting all the inferior livestock. "In the future, when you come and check on my wages, my honesty will testify to me. If I have any female goats that are not speckled or spotted, or any lambs that are not black, they will be considered stolen." God said to Laban, "Let it be as you have said." That day Laban removed, now Laban's doing this, all the streaked and spotted male goats and all the speckled and spotted female goats, every one that had any white on it, and every dark-colored one among the lambs. And he placed his sons in charge of them. Okay? He put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob. Jacob, meanwhile, was shepherding the rest of Laban's flock. So Jacob then took branches of fresh poplar, almond, and plane wood, and peeled the bark, exposing the white stripes on the branches. He set the peeled branches in the troughs in front of the sheep, in the water channels where the sheep came to drink. And the sheep bred, and when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the branches and bore streaked and speckled and spotted young. Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face the streaked sheep and the completely dark sheep in Laban's flock. Then he set his own stock apart, but didn't put them with Laban's sheep. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob placed the branches in the troughs in full view of the flocks, and they would breed in front of the branches. As for the weaklings of the flocks, he did not put out the branches. So it turned out that the weak sheep belonged to Laban and the strong ones belonged to Jacob. And the man became very rich. He had many flocks, female and male slaves, and camels and donkeys. Wow, there's a lot there. Okay, have you ever read through Leviticus and tried to figure out all the offerings and this and that and this and that and this and that? That's kind of like that right there. Okay, but we're going to cover that a little bit. So Jacob wants to go home. He's got his son from Rachel. It's time to travel. Okay, but God hadn't told him to go back yet. Now, so it's time to go back. He says, "Now I have a son from my favorite wife." And so we see there that Laban knows that God is with Joseph, but he's still cunning. He knows through divination. However he found it out, we don't know. It's just, some of them will say through experience, but it's really the divination. He's doing something that's a little odd, and he found this out. So I want to group the next three together. So he knows that God is there. He knows that he has prospered by Jacob, and then Jacob takes the undesirable parts of the herd. So all this seems on the up and up, but it's not. So in that, there's 6 more years of service. So he's going to work for Laban for 6 more years. He's been there 14. He's going to work for 6, which is 20 total years. And so Jacob takes the undesirable parts of the herd, and there's a separation, so they can't, 3 days journey, they can't go and breed with one another. They have to breed with what is where. Okay, that's important. And then so God is with Jacob in the livestock, and there's herd growth and there's herd health growth. Now, the poplar, the almond sticks, the plane wood and all that, there's a whole lot of people that say a whole lot of things, but there's nothing definitive, okay? Some people say that obviously he was a very good shepherd and he would understand these things. And then there's some people that say, they called it animal husbandry, which means that animal science. There's nothing in animal science today that tells us that sticking sticks in the water of a type of is going to cause something to be spotted. That is what we understand today, that is the DNA of the father and the mother, and a stick in the water isn't going to affect that, okay? So now if somebody has learned something new since I read that, I'm all for that, but there's a lot of people saying a lot of things. We don't know what it is. But obviously Jacob is doing something. He's not 100% honest in everything that he's doing, but yet God has set him apart to be the carrier of the promise through his sons. Okay? We do know that. All right? And so God is with Jacob and he's growing. Now, Jacob is not perfect. He's not perfect in his conduct, and God still prospers him. So he grew prosperous, and he had a large herd and many different animals and many different servants. So what God was doing here, irrespective of all the crazy things that he's done, that he's engaged in, that God supplied him and prepared him and was preparing him for God's future use of him. Okay? So let's go back, and we went last week and we realized that it looked like Sarah and, Rebecca and Jacob won. Last week we talked about that, and the week before, because they deceived Isaac. But God was still going to flow through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He was still going to do that regardless of everybody trying to work it. Now here, Jacob obviously is not in a favorable situation because he doesn't have anything of his own. He's working for Laban. But yet God is prospering him. He's getting a larger herd that is his, and he's getting more and more servants. When you have more servants, you have workers, and you have military people that if you are attacked, they can repel an enemy. Remember, Abraham had 318 people. I think it was 318. Men for war. So you have these people that can protect you in your clan. So God is preparing him even though he is not perfect. Now, if he would have done it God's way, this is what would have happened. He would have gone to Leah and he would have married her, and God would have worked it out however he wanted it. It's quite possible he could have had the 12 sons through her. How do I know that? In Jacksonville, North Carolina, there is a family called Morton. One lady had 18 sons. 18 sons. Yes. Morton is their last name. You ever go to Jacksonville, Florida, you're going to see Morton Construction, Morton Concrete, Morton Towing. A grandson sold me a vehicle at the Marine Chevrolet in Jacksonville. That's how I found out about that. Yes, 18 sons. 18. It's incredible. I don't know, but if you look up the Morton family in Jacksonville, North Carolina, they're all over the place. It's coming out of the same family. Okay? In the town where I grew up in, there were like 6 or 8 brothers with the last name of Ripkoski. They were all in World War II together. They did a documentary on them, all from the same town, Ripkoski. And Ripkowski, Ripkoski. And they were in World War II together, all brothers. And so, yeah, Miss Morton. Yeah, Miss Morton. You can look up Morton, the Morton family in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And yeah, okay. 18. What's that?
No, I have a question, not like that.
Okay.
I gotta get my thoughts.
Okay. So, and just let me give you an example of that. There was an Irish family that lived in an apartment complex, it's a townhome complex where we're at in Southern California. I was still in the military. They have a son and a daughter that are 11 months apart in age. And so, 11 months apart in age. And so they kind of laugh about it. And okay. Anyway, so, it's possible with that family in North Carolina, in Jacksonville, had a lot of children. Okay. So it's quite possible that Leah could have very well had all the sons that God wanted Jacob to have. All right. So let's go to chapter 31. Okay. There's some more deception that's going on. And so we're going to look in verses 1 to 21 of chapter 30. 31. 1 to 21. I'll get my numbers down. It's like last week it was Sunday and Wednesday. I couldn't figure out what day was what. Okay, 31, chapter 31, verse 1, going to verse 21. Now Jacob heard what Laban's sons were saying. Jacob has taken all that was our father's and has built his wealth from what we belonged to our father. That's kind of a whining story. And Jacob saw from Laban's face that his attitude toward him was not the same as before. The Lord said to him, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you." Now remember, on the way there, God said, "I will be with you. I will be with you, and everything will happen as I say it." Jacob had Rachel and Leah called to the field where his flocks were. He said to them, "I can see from your father's face that his attitude toward me is not the same as before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that with all my strength I have served your father, and that he has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Wow. Okay, but God has not, now that's repeated more than once. So at first I would think that would be a euphemism, but we repeat the 10 again, which indicates that it was 10. But God has not let him harm me. If he said, the spotted sheep will be your wages, then all the sheep will be born spotted. If he said, the streaked sheep will be your wages, then all the sheep were born streaked. God has taken away your father's herds and given them to me. When the flocks were breeding, I saw in a dream that the streaked, spotted, and speckled males were mating with the females. In that dream, the angel of God said to me, Jacob. I said, here I am. And he said, look up and see all the males that are mating with the flock are streaked, spotted, and speckled. For I have seen that all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel. Remember that he changed it from Luz to Bethel, where you poured oil on the stone marker and made a solemn vow to me. Get up, leave this land, and return to your native land. When Rachel and Leah answered him, do we have any portion or inheritance in our father's family? Are we not regarded by him as outsiders? For he has sold us and has certainly spent our purchase price. That would be the bride price or the dowry. Okay. In fact, all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. So do whatever God has said to you. They're not too happy with Dad. So Jacob got up and put his children and wives on the camels. He took all the livestock and the possessions he had acquired in Paddan Aram and drove them to the land of Canaan to his father. Let me get to the next page here. Isaac. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stirred her father's household idols. Things were going good for a little while, but then the younger daughter goes and steals some stuff. And Jacob deceived Laban, the Aramean, not telling him that he was fleeing. So Jacob's doing something wrong. Rachel is doing something wrong. Leah's not doing anything wrong here. He fled with all his possessions, crossed the Euphrates, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. Okay. So he leaves secretly. He's trying to get out by night, when no one's looking. Everybody ever watch the movie The Sound of Music? Remember when the captain and the former nun get married and they're trying to leave it, they're trying to leave at night or whatever, or they leave and they don't tell anybody because it's getting ready to be World War II? It's kind of like this. They're fleeing. They're trying to get out of there. Okay. So Jacob is aware that Laban and his sons are unhappy with him. They can see the countenance in that. So Jacob's cousins, these are his cousins, are complaining. Think of this. Jacob took Dad's stuff. Jacob took all our dad's stuff. This cousin rolls into town, he takes all of our stuff. Jacob's working hard. What were they doing? Why weren't they working hard? What were they doing? Riding the gravy train? Jacob showed up with nothing. And now he's got a lot of stuff. So obviously, I know the Lord's with him, but he's working hard. And so Laban is not nearly as friendly, and there's a changing relationship. So there is a changing relationship. they show up with nothing. Jacob shows up with nothing, and that he leaves with everything. Jacob's name is changed to Israel. In Exodus chapter 1, Israel is in the land of Goshen, showed up with nothing, and yet when they leave Egypt, they're leaving with everything. We see a parallel there. Okay? There's a parallel there when they leave there in Exodus after the plagues. Okay? I'm not saying that I don't want to force something there, but you certainly see a parallel there. Okay? So, these are actually reversed. I'm sorry about that. Jacob is aware. These are reversed. I'm sorry about that. And so Jacob reveals that God revealed to him it's time to pick up and go. And then Jacob tells Rachel and Leah the situation. And so the Lord said to leave. Jacob tells Rachel and Leah that it's time to go. And they're not too happy with Dad because they feel as though they haven't been respected by Dad the way that they need to be. And so they realize that they're kind of without an inheritance. Because remember when I told you the dowry or the bride price or whatever that was, that would be a down payment by the man, and that the bride would bring that to the wedding. Okay? So he's married them, but he's worked for 7 years, and what have they got? They don't have anything, but what God has provided is all the sheep that are growing under Jacob are not growing under Laban, so everything there is being given to Jacob. And so they said, why not? Let's go. Let's go ahead and leave. Okay? And so they are on board with what God said. Difficult situation. Okay? So it's kind of like this. In all my husband's hard work, we don't have anything. But what we do have, God took it away from Laban. He took it away, and now it's theirs. They indicate that belongs to their children. So all their husbands work, but Laban doesn't see it that way. But that's the way that they see it. And so when Laban is out in the field, Rachel goes into the house and steals her father's gods, his idols. So in that culture, as I said earlier, those idols likely would probably be various sizes, some bigger, some smaller. And what they were likely, in many of them, though not all of them, okay, they would be carved nude without clothing. Some of them would have clothing, and they were considered sexual sculptures, but not in a visual lust. It's not like that at all. But they would be like fertility and reproduction, because you wanted a family, you wanted a strong family, so that the family itself could be taken care of. And so they would do whatever they could do to have these idols in the house, thinking that those idols would help them have more children, is what a lot of these gods were. A lot of fertility, a lot of depravity, and also protection.
Fertility for your animals, for your
Yes.
you couldn't really store things over time. If you had one bad season,
You're done.
wipe out your family.
That's right. You had a drought, your crop was gone, you get bird flu, no eggs. Kind of like we got now, you know. You got those. That's right. So it was for everything. It was protection of the family. It was your little God, because we're going to see these gods are going to come into play in a little bit in a covenant. But Becky's right. You know, it's for everything. So, you know, because it says in Deuteronomy that if you go into the land and you don't honor me, you're not going to have any plants coming out of the ground, and your livestock will not reproduce. And so God says, see, they don't need rock, stick, whatever cloth gods. They need the God. And God said, I will keep your land fertile if you honor me. So they're honoring, let's call it a stick or a rock or something like that. And now, that would also, as another thing that some folks brought out that study this culture that's their living, they would signify that when they took Jacob's gods, right here, that Rachel likely thought that now I'm taking these gods, I'm saying that my husband is now the head of the family. Okay? Not that Laban is no longer head of the family because I'm taking his gods. I'm taking the gods of my father. I'm going to point that out in just a little bit. I think I got it written in here later. Did I write that down? Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to touch on that in just a little bit. I'm going to come back to this, but I'm going to cover it in the last slide. So there was that coming into play, that this was kind of like his father's gods. It would be kind of like today, where's my Bible? You know, when Laban asks, where's my gods? It's kind of like, where's my Bible? So we don't worship the Bible. We identify with the Bible. We don't worship it, but they would worship and identify with this thing. So it's very serious to steal those things in that culture. Okay? And so God did tell him to flee. He says, leave out. Now he said leave, but he didn't say violate a custom. You were still supposed to respect your elders in that culture. You were still supposed to do that. And so he did violate a custom. Now he says because of protection, but still it's not the best situation. So it's describing it. God didn't prescribe to depart in the middle of the night and not tell him. It doesn't indicate that God told him that. Okay, then he fled with all he had, his family, his servants, and his animals. So he did flee. So he's getting out of town in the middle of the night. It's kind of like when the judge says, get out of town, you get out of town. And that's what they did. Okay. All right, so in 22, let's see here, through 42. We've got a couple of more. So in chapter 31, let's look in verse 22. Okay, on the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So Jacob's got a 3-day head start. Remember, there was a 3-day distance between them. So he took his relatives with him, pursued Jacob for 7 days, and overtook him in the hill country of Gilead. Why they could do that is he had animals and little kids, and Laban didn't have that. Okay, he was making much better time. Overtook him in the country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in the night and said, watch yourself. God warned him, don't say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. When Laban overtook Jacob, Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban and his relatives also pitched their tents in the hill country of Gilead. Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? You have deceived me and taken my daughters away like prisoners of war. Why did you secretly flee? Why did you secretly flee from me, deceive me, and not tell me I would have sent you away with joy, singing with tambourines and lyres. But you didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters. You have acted foolishly. I could do you great harm, because he has all of his animals and all his 4 wives and all the children. It's a lot to defend. He says, great harm. But last night the God of your father said to me, watch yourself. Don't say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long for your father's family. But why have you stolen my gods? Why have you taken my stuff? Jacob answered, I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. If you find your gods with anyone here, he will not live. Okay, before our relatives point out anything that is yours and take it. Jacob did not know Rachel had stolen the idols. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, Leah's tent, and the tents of the 2 concubines, but he found nothing. When he left Leah's tent, he went into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken Laban's household gods and put them in the saddlebag of the camel and sat on them. Laban searched the whole tent but found nothing. He said to Pharaoh, don't be angry with me, Lord. I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period. So Laban searched but could not find the household gods. Okay, then Jacob became incensed and brought charges against Laban. He goes, what is my crime? He said to Laban. What is my sin that you have pursued me? You've searched all my possessions. Have you found anything of yours? Put it here before my relatives and yours, and let them decide between the 2 of us. I've been with you these 20 years. Your ewes and female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams from your flock. I did not bring you any of the flock torn by the wild beasts. I myself bore my loss. You demanded payment for me for what was stolen by the day. There I was, the heat consumed me by day, the frost by night, and sleep fled from my eyes. For 20 years in your household I served you, 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks, and you have changed my wages 10 times. So there's the repetition. So it's likely that that is a hard and fast number. Okay. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, had not been with me, certainly now you would have sent me off empty-handed. But God has seen my affliction and my hard work and has issued this verdict last night. Okay. So Laban has got a mad on, but I think Laban has a change of heart. And so he is upset. He pursues them, but God warns him. He says, keep your attitude, your mouth, and your hands in check. Don't do anything, because Jacob, without being anointed, is God's anointed. Okay, he's the one that God has chosen. And we see that David said that he would not pursue Saul because he was God's anointed. Later on, David said, it's either 1st or 2nd Chronicles, I can't remember, that you are not to touch God's anointed. Now, it was talking about the prophets. In other words, you're those people that God has set apart in that culture, I'm not talking about today, that you aren't to touch them, that let God deal with them. So we see that being set up here. God says, don't touch him. And so Jacob, he pursues him. God warns him in a dream, and he catches up. And he's upset, but he heeds God's warning. He's angry. He's mad because he has been done, you would say, not right, because he was the head of that clan. And then he said, where's my gods? Where are my gods? And so he held on to those gods, like if someone came into my house and took my Bible and said it's the only one I got, I'd be very upset. I need to get me another one. Okay, this would be before cell phones and that. But where are my gods? Now they were an identity to him. He identified with those gods, and he felt those gods identified with him. Because without my gods, I'm not going to have the protection. There's not going to be the fertility. We're not going to have crops. We're not going to have animals. We're not going to have all these things because my little stick and rock gods are no longer there. So he is obviously very upset. Now, Jacob doesn't know that Rachel, his wife, has taken them. She took them, and then she is claiming that she can't get up, and she hides them. Okay? So we don't know if she's being honest or not. If she was being honest, what she said was the way it would be. Okay? That's just the way it was. But if she's not being honest, she's, of course, deceiving her father. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say. Okay? I mean, we could tend to say that we felt like she's not being truthful, but we don't know. Okay, so Laban finds nothing. Okay? And then he gets an earful from Jacob. But Jacob doesn't know that Rachel took those gods. So he gets an earful, and then he reveals the 20 years of hardships, and there's a moving target. His moving target is the 10 times that his wages were changed. So you might say that he's unscrupulous, I guess that would be the right word, or he is not an honest employer. And God wants employers to be honest toward their employees. You pay them, you take care of them because they're in your charge. Well, Laban had much power when Jacob showed up. He had a whole family, he had 3 flocks, had land, had water, had all these things. Jacob shows up with nothing. It appeared he walked. Didn't say he brought any camels or anything. And so he had that, and it's a moving target. But it revealed that God was with him. So now the deception that has been going on in the family, now the deception includes foreign gods. The deception includes pagan gods. The deception includes false gods. And so the family's ongoing deception there includes all of that. Dysfunction, isn't it? And it's going to be dysfunction until Jesus comes back. It just happens that we see 20 years condensed into a couple of chapters, and so we can see that. And you know, I think if the Lord took 20 of our years and condensed it down into 2 chapters, people would probably say, what in the world was that person thinking? You know, we're all broken. We are. All right, so let's look in 43 through 55. We're going to see a covenant there. And still the covenant is, there's more of that going on. Okay, verse 43. Okay. Then Laban answered Jacob, the daughters are my daughters. How about that? The sons are my sons, and the flocks are my flocks. He is actually not speaking incorrectly. I'm going to point that out in just a minute. But he's posturing. Everything you see is mine. But what can I do today for the daughters of mine or for the children they have borne? Come now, that I've spoke rather loudly to you and told you who I am. Let's make a covenant, you and me, you and I. Let it be a witness between the two of us. So Jacob picked out a stone and set it as a marker. Then Jacob said to his relatives, gather stones. They took stones and made a mound and ate there by the mound. And Laban named the mound that thing, and Jacob named it Gilead. Then Laban said, this mound is a witness between you and me. Therefore the place was called Gilead. And also Mizpah, for he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of each other's sight. Okay, if you mistreat my daughters or take other wives, though no one is with us, understand that God will be a witness between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, look at this mound and the marker I have set up between you and me. This mound is a witness, and the marker is a witness that I will not pass beyond this mound to you, and you will not pass beyond this mound and this marker to do me harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the gods of their father Terah, okay, the judge will judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited the relatives to eat a meal. So they ate a meal and spent the night on the mountain. Laban got up early in the morning, kissed his grandchildren and daughters, and blessed them. And Laban left and returned home. All right. So there's still posturing going on here on the part of Laban. So he attempts to appear gracious by claiming ownership over his daughters and everything that Jacob had. Now, if you recall, since he is the head of that household, his statement is not entirely incorrect, but there are wages that are involved, so you got to be very careful there. Do you remember in Genesis 48:5 when Jacob says that Ephraim and Manasseh are mine, and then the children that they have later will be yours? So we see the headship of the family or the clan making a statement of ownership, okay? But Jacob is doing it out of love. Laban is doing it out of a position of I'm high and mighty, it appears. So he's not fully incorrect, but he's not fully correct. So he boasts all of this, and then from this position, now let's make a covenant. So he comes in real loud and makes all these statements and says, okay, now let's make a covenant, a non-aggression pact. Let's make a treaty so we won't fight each other. After he kind of lets Jacob know who he is. Like he's got to beat his chest. He's been with him for 20 years. Why would he need to do that? He wouldn't need to do that. Okay. So what did they do? They make a covenant. He verbalizes all that. And so now we see that the four inset pieces there, let's look at them. There's a pile of stones. There's a meal. They're naming the place, and they're bringing in God as a witness. But he's not going to be the only God. Okay, and then Jacob cannot, and part of the covenant, the stipulations of the covenant. This is very common in the ancient Near East. There are stipulations in the covenant. There's blessings and curses in a covenant. There's witnesses to a covenant. And so Jacob can't mistreat his daughters, Laban's daughters, or take another wife. And then there's a boundary so they don't cross over each other to go after each other. It's basically a non-aggression pact. They each stays in their own land. And so God had told Laban, don't mistreat him, which means that Jacob belongs to me, and don't get out of line, because he realizes that it's God. So it's typical covenant stuff. Now we do see a sacrifice, but we don't see the slaying of animals like we do in Genesis 15. Where they cut the animals and they walk through them and any of that. They didn't do. It was a verbalized covenant, and they did have the stone. The marker is the sign of the covenant. They built that pile of rocks, and they spoke over it with the witnesses there. So that pile of rocks is the sign of the covenant between Jacob and Laban. And so that would be the sign of that. Okay, so then notice what they do. They call on the God of Abraham, and then they call the God of Nahor, and his father is Terah. Okay, and we studied that earlier, though Terah's name is not mentioned here, but that's who it is. And then what does Jacob do? Jacob takes the high ground. They're adding all this other stuff in, and so what Jacob does is he goes back to the fear of his father Isaac. He is appealing to the God of Abraham and Isaac. In that way is what he's doing there. So here he takes the high road. He's not getting caught up in this discussion. He goes, I fear what my father fears, or I have reverence for what my father has reverence for, and that is Yahweh Elohim, is what he's saying there. The fear of his father Isaac. Not that Isaac is partially blind, only going to live for a couple more years. So he's not afraid of his dad. His dad might not even hear about this covenant. Okay? But what he's appealing to is Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so Jacob takes the high road there. And so there's covenant supervision. And so the gods, I'm going to say plural, all these gods that they've thrown in there, it's basically the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and then their gods, which were the gods, get this, the gods that Rachel stole from Laban are probably being brought into this covenant. Because those were the gods that Terah would have handed down to Nahor. And so those gods that were stolen, those little rock and stick gods, were brought into this covenant by Laban. The gods he doesn't have anymore. See how silly that is? Because they were stolen. Okay? And then with all that, Jacob leads in worship. He breaks bread. Laban kisses his daughters and goes on back home with nothing. Doesn't have his gods. Doesn't have any more animals. Doesn't go back with any kids. He ran out there to set things straight. He went back with nothing more than what he left with. Because God was with Jacob. Now again, this is not prescribed, it's described. So yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. He sure did. He sure did.
Jacob just messed everything up.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have nothing. And comes back and he's got all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And think about it. We get a lot of nice things.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And God still gives us good things.
Mm-hmm. And this, yeah.
So often, even though we misbehave.
That is correct. It's in the Sermon on the Mount. Even if your father can give you good gifts, your Father in heaven can give you good gifts. He gives you the good gifts, and the good gift is a relationship with Him and eternity with Him. But God was setting Jacob up so that to bring about the 12 sons, the 12 partitions of land, and then the tribe of Levi, there in the land so that a theocracy could be established of which the Messiah would come. So since God had determined how His Son Messiah would come, God had to work it out through Jacob because that was already predetermined. So Jacob was going to have all these sons regardless of all this that he did. So here's what happened. Now think about this. So remember when we were supposed to see things through God's eyes. But what did Jacob do as soon as he got into his distant family's land? He looked with his eyes and he saw Rachel. And then he looked at Leah, and Leah had soft eyes or downturned eyes or whatever. So Leah wasn't the looker, Rachel was. But so he wanted to go with Rachel. If he would have gone with Leah first of all, and would have seen with God's eyes and not his eyes, okay, the whole thing might have turned out. The end result would have been the same. The process of getting it there would have looked probably very different. Yeah. Yes. We do. We do. And you know, you see, we think microwaves are a new invention, and so we want it now, but they wanted it now. Give me your mandrakes. You can sleep with my husband. Well, guess what? She sleeps with her husband without the mandrakes and has 2 more sons. Can you imagine that? Two sisters fighting over the same man. But it's just foreign to us. You know, it is. At least I haven't heard of it. Yeah. See, because we learn things that, and we see, so it's like I sent you an email, and I use that phrase, we don't trust God until we have to trust God. We have to trust God, we do trust God. When we do trust God, we realize that we could trust God every step of the way. So the moral of the story is, trust God. And he should have seen with God's eyes and not his eyes. He was not a young man, okay? Because when you look at the life, it's possible. I forget how old he was when he left. I think I put it there earlier, but he was not a young guy because you look at the age because of the age there. Now, not sure how old he was. I have to look that up, but I'll get that to you. I'll look at that.
You would have thought an older man had that sense.
Well, yeah.
But then you think, was it Jeremiah? It was Jeremiah that was 17 and a half, if I got that right. And he couldn't understand how God could, he don't know nothing. And look what he did.
Look, and then, well, Job too had questions, and then when God spoke, Job, okay, my lips are shut. I got nothing else to say. And Jonah bellyached, and then it went silent because Jonah realized, I'm barking up the wrong tree here. I'm complaining. What do you? God said, you got a right to be angry? I do have a right to be angry. Good gosh.
The way to get away from the God of the universe is to go in a certain direction.
Yeah. It didn't work.
He's not going to be the God of the place we're going.
Yeah, and he's a prophet. He's supposed to be. He's the best that the Northern Kingdom had to offer, and he fled.
So these gods
Yeah,
really were figurines.
they're figurines.
And it's gold.
What's that?
Really gold.
Stone, rock, whatever they had. Not always gold. Gold. Some could be gold or silver, but if they had a precious metal, they would go ahead because then that makes the god more precious. But sometimes they were made out of rock, and then they would carve it out, and they would carve it out and smooth it out. So it just depended. So whenever I sometimes use the phrase worshiping sticks and rocks and frogs, there's just a whole bunch of other myriad of things. Because you know the Egyptians were worshiping frogs. And a stick could be fashioned into a god, and a rock could be fashioned into a god. What's that?
You know about women.
Yes, that's right. You would carve, yeah. They did a lot. There were so many all over the world. There were so many different things. Yeah, so many different things. You know, you just try to put something together, and this is my God.
When I studied the gods of Mesopotamia and Egypt and different places, there's looking at, it's like
That's right.
Very chaotic world.
So they had these gods, and they had no understanding of La Nina or El Nino or whatever that in the oceans. You know how that moves around. There's that spot that I don't. You just don't know. But those gods are powerless, and Yahweh said they're powerless. They're not going to help you. They don't hear you. They don't hear you. So if we were going to summarize this, there's a lot of deception. There's dysfunctionality. There's wives and sisters at odds. They're in competition with each other to have more kids. Okay, they're fighting over that. Then the concubines get in the arrangement. Can you imagine this? This is my slave lady. Here, sleep with my husband so you can give me a child. Here, you birth that child and then give it to me. I'll adopt it. Then you can get back to work. That's what it was. And so the sisters are bartering over who can sleep with their husband over a plant that was, how should I say, a cousin to the potato. And it was the mandrake. And then, of course, God is with him. God told him to go back home. And Jacob and Laban are both less than honest. Now, Laban, of course, goes back to the idolatry. And then we see Laban's gods. Jacob flees. God warns Laban there's a covenant. And then they don't see each other. And then he says goodbye and everybody goes home. But notice, all of this Jacob going home was going to happen anyway. But you're just getting humans involved and getting in the way. That's why we say get out of God's way. Give the Lord opportunity to maneuver, to work, and do His thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tell you, let me close in prayer, and if there's any questions, and then for those of you online, if you want to send an email, I get those from some of you from time to time. Why did this, and how did that, and where's that on the map? Those types of things. I certainly don't mind that at all, because I want to be a help, and I consider it an honor to help. So let me close in prayer. Father, we do again lift up those that are not feeling well. We think of the Molina family. We think of those that are in the hospital. Those that are not able to be here, the children that are suffering in the midst of this. As adults, we can tend to kind of take care of ourselves, but children, they just don't understand. They're miserable. So, Father, we thank you for the families that are here tonight, that are loving on kids and teaching students. We thank you for this class. Father, thank you for the commitment of those that are able to be here. We just thank you for that we can learn together. Father, we give you all the glory. We look forward to this Sunday as we open up again the book of Colossians. We love you, and it's in